Hey y'all, Beats Motel here, back with another video. If you see that I'm still wearing the same shirt, think that yes I am. I'm recording these videos back to back, but hey, at least I changed the side of the mug. So this next book I'm gonna talk about, I am really excited to talk about it. It combines two of my favorite things of all time, reading and horror. Of course, I am talking about Hollywood Monster by Mr. Robert Englund. Kind of get this for the thumbnail. So, kind of some background to make this video a little longer, because my last one was not even 4 minutes. So, as many of you know, Robert Englund plays Freddy Krueger in the Nightmare on Elm Street series. While that is not my favorite horror series of all time, it's my favorite's tossed between Halloween and Friday the 13th. If you can't tell, I got my Halloween 3 Season of the Witch mask over here. I got my Jason stuff right here. I mean, I got my little Michael Myers and everything. But when it comes to A Nightmare on Elm Street, I have not been the biggest fan. Growing up, I love the movies and I still love them. It's just not something that I clicked with or connected with. Obviously it played a huge impact in the genre and whatnot. I love Wes Craven as a director. Excuse me, I like, The Hills Have Eyes, The Last House on the Left. I Spit on Your Grave, I've only seen the remake. I'm not the biggest fan of that one, but regardless. So when it came to Christmas time, my wife was asking what I was wanting. I just kind of told her books. Kind of threw some ones out there, and I never really heard a whole lot about this book somehow, some way. But I asked her for it. She knew that I really wanted it. We went to the Texas Frightmare Convention a couple years back, and he was there. They were doing the reunion of Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, which is my favorite one personally. And I wanted to meet him. I could not stand to wait in that line. I knew people that waited there all day and still didn't get to meet him, unfortunately, because for whatever reason, is what I heard. But I was very excited to read this. So when I opened this on Christmas Day, I was super excited to read this. I couldn't wait to dive into it. And I will say, this is a quick page turn. I mean, you will hear a lot of people say, yeah, it's a page turn, you'll go fly through it. This one you really will. And the part of that is because, really, this chunk right here, a good chunk of this book, is the appendix, where it's all of his movies or roles that he's played in TV shows, TV movies, movies, whatnot. So kind of going over this book. So it starts off and he's talking about growing up and whatnot. And I will say one good thing he did, he kind of tells you some about growing up and before he got into Hollywood, but he doesn't dive too much into it. I'm not saying that I don't find that interesting, but when I read a book like this, I want to hear more about the movies and the roles that you played. And I think Mr. Englund did great in this book, because you got a little bit of his growing up and whatnot, and then you get to where he talks about going and doing theater and whatnot, and how he ends up going over to Hollywood. And he delves into a lot on the Nightmare on Elm Street. He goes through from Nightmare on Elm Street 1 all the way up to, what's that one? Wes Craven's New Nightmare. He tells all that, and he got other stuff in there too. He's got, I think it's V or 5, whatever. I think it's V, which was a show that he was on that was really popular. He talks about The Mangler, directed by Tobe Hooper. Him and Tobe Hooper, I will say, Tobe Hooper's mentioned quite a bit here. I didn't realize that they knew each other that well. He even talks about Andy Kaufman in this book, which I found very interesting, being a huge wrestling fan. Anything with Andy Kaufman, I'm interested to hear about. He talks about how he went up against roles with other famous actors, like Gary Busey. I think that's how you pronounce his last name. I could be wrong. But anyway, so he just delves into all that leads up to all his major roles. And one thing Mr. Englund does in this book that I really enjoy, again, is him delving into, the different Nightmare movies and kind of his experience for each one. So he talks about in the first one how when he was going to act or try out for the role of Freddy, he talks about how he opened his, the hood to his engine, pulled out the dipstick, took the oil off of it, kind of silked his hair back, got in his ashtray that his friend had left some ashes in, spit in his fingers, kind of mixed it around, put it under his eyes. And I had heard that before. I listened to the Don't Go Out There horror movie podcast. Great podcast. Definitely recommend listening to it if you're a horror fan. Excuse me. If any of those guys see this, love the show, keep it up. But so he delves into that, which, and again, I've heard him say that on that interview and whatnot. But one thing I didn't realize was as the movies got on, obviously he got older. He was, I don't want to say he was old when he first got the role. I think he was in his 30s when he first got the role of Fred Krueger. But as, the movies go on, they're not one year after another. I mean, there's a big time gap between First Nightmare and Wes Craven's New Nightmare. I could be wrong. They might have made the movies one year after another. That's regardless. Besides the point, they just... He talks about how it took its wear and tear on him, and he just every time he talks about how the latex or whatever, the skin, Freddy's skin, would get stuck to him because of stunts they would do. He talks about just everything and the wear and tear it took on him and all that. And by the time he was just done, and then Wes came up to him and said, "Hey, I have an idea. I'm kind of getting in the works. What do you think about doing another, Nightmare movie, but this one's just a little different?" And he talks about how if Wes was behind it, he's doing it. He is no problem. His hands are free. Let's do it, kind of thing. And so I found that very interesting that he wasn't really too keen to take on the role, but he knew Wes was going to be behind the camera lens, and he knew that he was going to kind of be himself in there, as well as Heather Langenkamp, which plays Nancy, and Wes Craven's actually in the movie. So he talks about that, and then there's a small little part at the end where he talks about Freddy versus Jason. And he talks about how, he was waiting for years, there was in the works, and it just never came to fruition. And he talks about how, it finally came to happening, and he was going to do it. And how they filmed up in British Columbia and whatnot, and he talks about a little bit on that. Doesn't touch that subject a whole lot, which I was kind of hoping he would talk a little bit more about. Freddy vs. Jason is one of my favorite horror movies of all time. That is the only way you get better than that is like Freddy versus Michael Myers or Jason versus Michael Myers, in my opinion. But regardless, and one other thing I did forget to mention, there's a scene in here, and I'm sorry this is gonna be a spoiler, but he talks about how they would go out when they were first making the first Nightmare movie. They would go out and they would go, get Thai food or whatever, Vietnamese food, whatever. So they're talking about how they're driving in Hollywood down the street. And apparently it's a well-known area where Women of the Night, as I will put it, work. And so they pull up and his buddy's in the driver's seat and says, "Hey, my friend in the back, he's kind of lonely. He just came back from the war. He got injured. You think you can help him?" And she goes, "Well, where's he at?" And he goes, "In the back seat." Rolls the window down and she sees him. And he does the laugh, the Freddy laugh, that iconic Freddy laugh. And he talks about how she just ran down the street back to her pimp. I was reading that part probably about 12:30 at night, and I just busted out laughing. I mean, that's just that. If you can get a reaction out of me like that, I don't care if it's in a biography, you can get a reaction out of me like that, where I make a laugh or kind of thing, automatically goes up in my opinion on that book. Sorry, had to get some coffee. Anyways, and so he talks about that, and that part just made me laugh, and I could not wait to talk about that in this review, because it's such a great biography, or autobiography, if you will. I love how he, again, they got the appendix in there with all his different roles. He talks about a lesser known role. Where is it? I have it down here somewhere. I do apologize, I'm trying to look and see where it's at. Is that it? Yes. Sorry, I had to look for it. So he talks about Phantom of the Opera a little bit. And so he talks about in this how, I believe it was this one, how, the wardrobe department was not the most professional. He was in a foreign country, and he talks about how he takes a lot of jobs to work in foreign countries just so he can get to see them, which I think is really cool, because most people would say, that role's below me. But he looks at it as, hey, you know what? I can go see another country. I get paid to do it, kind of thing. And so he talks about that. But in that, he was talking about how he the wardrobe department. He woke up one morning and his sheets were just soaked in blood. He couldn't figure out why. He thought maybe something had happened. He thought maybe he had been in a Freddy dream or something himself. And no, it was lice. There were actually lice in the pants that he was wearing that had chewed his legs up so severely. Um, and so he talks about, and that's something I found very interesting. I knew Mr. England was a down to earth person from, what I've heard from people that have met him and just interviews that I've seen him do and whatnot. But again, he just talks about, yeah, I wanted to go to this other country. I took it. It may not have been the best role ever. It was a kind of a side role, but hey, you know what? I'm taking. I'll get to go see this other country. I'll get, again, get paid for it. And he talks about, how, during like the writer's strike and whatnot, how that he was hoping this job was going to be in production, because if it wasn't in production, then they couldn't film. But if it was already in production, they could keep filming and he could make money that way. And how he took a lot of different roles, smaller roles, before a writer's strike happened. So that way he had like a nest egg to rely on if the writer's strike took longer than what he anticipated. So again, I found this book very, very interesting. If you are a horror fan, or you're just kind of interested to get the background on such a loved series. I mean, here in the U.S., Nightmare on Elm Street is a beloved series by horror fans. But you go overseas, and they are Freddy crazy. I mean, they everything over there. And it amazes me too, because he talks about that in this book. How over here domestically, it's really popular. It's a great series. It's beloved by many. I love the series. Again, it's not my favorite, but I still love it. It is definitely on my Mount Rushmore of horror series. But he talks about overseas, how they just go bananas over that series when it first came out, and how even to this day they still do. Which I find very interesting, that the horror community overseas versus here, they're on par. But I feel like overseas, the horror merchandise gets a little bit more what's the term I'm looking for? Gets a little bit more used, I guess is the best way to put it. I mean, they put horror stuff on everything. He talks about in this book how he went and they put Freddy something on. I don't remember what it was. I think it was like a pill bottle or something over in Germany or somewhere like that. Satirized, I guess, is the best way to put it. Is how they do it. I mean, they just plaster it on everything they can, and people eat it up. People buy it. I mean, obviously. I have a Halloween mask, and it's not even Halloween. I have it sitting out. I mean, the horror community in general, we love our favorite horror movies, our icons, our horror icons. Again, it's not my favorite, but still, I wanted to read this book by it. And I cannot highly recommend this book enough. You will fly through this book. He's got some nice, interesting pictures in here and whatnot. And he even talks a little bit about Star Wars in here. He talks about Mark Hamill. I mean, he knows everybody, and he just seems like a very down to earth guy. Again, I know I've already said this. I'm gonna sound like a broken record. I can't praise it enough. I really can't. I mean, he just delves into so much in this in such a short amount of time. I mean, I've read this book in less than a day. I mean, and I'm not the fastest reader out there. I promise you that. One other thing I will note that I found very interesting in here, there's a little paragraph in here. You have the Freddy eye, but there's a little thing where he talks about, and I'm not sure if he made them up or if these were actually happened, but they're like nightmares that he had or has had, and he included them in there, which I found very interesting. I mean, obviously being the man that come at you in your nightmares, and he's including some of his own, like 9 or 10 of his own in there. Again, he talks about his divorces, the relationships he's gone through. Doesn't delve a whole lot into them. There's one in particular that he talks more about. But he kind of realizes in this book, hey, you know what, people are here for this. Let's focus on this. I'll kind of glance over this stuff and give them a little bit more insight, but mostly focus on this. And again, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the book, 100%. I would easily, if you find this anywhere, used bookstore, new bookstore, buy it. It is a great read. Again, I can't say enough about this book. If you could tell, I'm super excited to talk about anything horror-wise. When you throw horror and books together, it makes me super happy. Kind of makes me want to go rewatch the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. Another thing that I will throw in there as well, he talks a little bit about Nightmare on Elm Street 2, which has started out having a cult following. There's some stuff in there that has come to light about, the beneath the layers messages in that movie about it being, it's for, you know, back then I guess it was for, I don't even know what they're referred to as, but there's layers, hidden messages under the layers of that movie. And as a kid, I never understood that. I never got that message from this, but he talks about how he understood it from, reading the script and how it intrigued him. And he thought it was just a little bit different than the first one. And he wanted to, he wanted to go into it. And he was all gung ho. And he talks about how he really didn't want to be remembered as just Freddy Krueger. I mean, he didn't want to be remembered as the guy that came at you in your nightmares. And then he was talking to Mark Hamill, and Mark Hamill told him, hey, you know what? You should be honored. Anybody should be honored that you are being remembered for one role in particular, because you could have a whole lot of different roles, which is nice. But if you are remembered for one role, you made that role iconic. And I must say that Mr. Robert Englund did make Freddy Krueger iconic. There will never be another Freddy Krueger. They have tried it. It didn't work out. No offense to that actor. I don't remember what his name was. In his defense, though, the movie wasn't the best. But again, Mr. Robert Englund, thank you for writing this book. It was a joy to read. Again, if you are a horror fan, or if you are just kind of interest is piqued, definitely pick this book up. Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, wherever you can find it, get it. It is a great, great book. I highly recommend it. This will be one I probably will revisit, in all honesty, because you just fly through it, and it's one you can read a chapter or two and not really lose your place. It's one that I enjoy reading every second of it. Even the parts that weren't about, horror stuff, I really enjoyed it. I absolutely, and again, I keep going on and on about this book. I love this book. I really did. Again, I recommend picking it up. Hope y'all enjoyed the review. Leave a like button, hit the subscribe button as well. If y'all have read this, let me know what you think. If let me know if Nightmare on Elm Street's your favorite, horror franchise. If not, tell me what it is down below. I'd love to talk about horror movies down in the comments with people, and kind of get some people's opinions and kind of start talking about that a little bit. Again, thank you for watching. Y'all have a good one.